So let us discuss this year's economic survey and this year's budget from especially from our examination point of view. It will be helpful for you both for prelims as well as mains, and of course those who are attending interview also. So before starting this discussion, what I would suggest is that to have some kind of continuity, you can watch last year's economic survey and budget also. It is there on Neo-Stencil website. You can watch those videos also, because at the end of the day it is all about continuity. So let us look at this year's economic survey and budget. What our finance minister has been doing for the last 5 years is they are bringing about 2 volumes of economic survey, volume 1 and volume 2. This volume 1 basically presents new ideas regarding solutions to the problems faced by the country, especially from economic perspective. Every year they come out with a new idea. Whereas volume 2 basically talks about the condition of Indian economy. What is the present status of Indian economy? Volume 2 is more factual in nature. And from your prelims point of view, every year from this volume 2 only, you have at least minimum 7 to 8 questions are there in your prelims. Minimum, I am talking about. So that means that if you are thorough with this economic survey, you can be sure of clearing at least, getting at least 8 questions right. Last year also it was the same case. At the end of which, at the end of our discussions today, I will be giving you the synopsis of both the volumes and also the synopsis of budget also. Along with that, some of the important newspaper articles also, which analyzed this economic survey and budget also. This material should be useful for you, especially for your prelims. So let us go into these discussions. Before going into what economic survey and budget had to say about Indian economy, its problems and solutions, let us have a simple macro perspective of Indian economy in the last few years as such. Let us try to understand what exactly is Indian economy. As all of us know, in 1991, India opted for a new development path, wherein India had liberalized its economy for the first time. We have opted for what is called liberalization, privatization and globalization, 1991. And from then onwards, we have made significant changes to our fiscal and monetary policies, because of which the country also had experienced rapid economic growth. For the first time, the country had witnessed even 9% growth rate also for a significant period of time. Along with this, we also faced so many challenges. Why? Because thanks to globalization, what happens is countries, especially the government's hold over economic policy, will be lessened, because at the end of the day, these global factors will influence the functioning of your economic systems also. Before 1991, India was a part of autarky, so whatever that happened in the rest of the world never really mattered to India. But now, whatever that happens in the rest of the world will have a huge impact on our economic system. So it has both what you call merits as well as demerits. Economic survey dealt extensively about all these aspects also. So looking at these things, if we look at the present status of Indian economy, what we can say is that Indian economy is experiencing what is called recession. Even though neither economic survey nor budget explicitly talked about recession, they never mentioned the word recession in the whole of 600 pages of economic survey or 48 pages of a budget. They never talked about recession. The R word was either deliberately avoided. Obviously, the government will never accept the fact that economy is under recession. But everyone knows, even a blind man can see that it is under recession. So let us look at what are the reasons for this recession and whether economic survey and budget had come out with any kind of what we call pragmatic solutions. So whenever you look at any economic system, either the growth rate, the growth of any economy depends on what we call domestic and second external factors. Either domestic as well as external factors. In domestic, we include three sectors: either household sector, business sector, government. In external, you include exports and imports. That is the reason why in economics we say that income is equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M. This is consumption, household, investment by business, government expenditure, exports and imports. If you look at the structure of our Indian economy, it is the consumption that contributes maximum to the demand. Around 57% comes from consumption demand. And investment demand is around 32%. Investment is about 32%. Net of exports and imports, India always have negative, because our exports are always less than the imports. Rest of it is what we call government expenditure. Rest of it is government expenditure. So, if you have to increase your income, if you have to increase your GDP, what you must do is that you must increase either your consumption or investment or government expenditure or improve your trade. This is the only way in which a country can grow. You must increase your consumption or investment or government expenditure or exports and imports. Let us look at all of them one by one. Starting with exports and imports. When Indian economy was growing at 9% per annum between say 2004 and 2009, this was the period when we were almost growing at 9% per annum. Our exports were growing at around 28% per annum. So obviously these trade, international trade contributed significantly to our economic growth and development. Obviously, if you have to grow at 9% per annum, you must ensure rapid growth of your exports and imports. On the other hand, it is also what is called mutually independent. If your GDP is increasing, automatically it results in improvement in your trade also. At this point of time, if you look at it, the situation is not there. Why? Because global trade is coming down. The volume of global trade is coming down. As the economic survey also points out, global GDP growth is also coming down. When global GDP comes down, automatically it results in a decline in global trade also. So obviously the conditions are not present for this kind of growth rate in our international trade. And obviously, this is a blessing in disguise also. Why? Because since international trade is not a major component, of our GDP, obviously reduction in global trade also should not have significant impact on our GDP also. In a country like say United States of America, trade is a very important factor, or for that matter China. What is our contribution to global trade now? India's contribution to global trade is around 1.6%. On the other hand, if you look at the case of China, it is around 12.8%. China's contribution to global trade. Or if you look at someone like America, more than 25%. So obviously for them, it is a life and death issue, because if the trade volume comes down, it will have a huge impact on their domestic economies also. Whereas in case of India, this declining global trade definitely had a negative impact, but this impact is not very significant. For good, India's volume in global trade is very less. Of course, it has definitely impacted. As I said that if you are growing at 9%, you require this much amount of increase in volume of global trade also. Unfortunately, the conditions are not present. Why? Because of this protectionist policies that are followed by countries like America, especially under Donald Trump. They have followed protectionist policies. They are not allowing exports and imports freely. And similarly, the problems related to Brexit, United Kingdom and European Union, and of course this US-China trade war, and of course these things, US-Iran tensions also. Added to that, icing on the cake is the present spread of this coronavirus. It is also adding icing on the cake. Obviously, it will also reduce the volume of global trade. So obviously, what the present situation is that India cannot see any drastic changes in the volume of its trade in the near future. We cannot see any drastic changes. Can we reach those levels of 28%? Very, very difficult. You can say impossible in the next few years. And again, if you look at the positive side of this, since in the last few years, our global trade is, the volume of global trade is less, we are starting from a low base. In the next few years, we can also improve it. And it is like looking at the things, glass is half empty or half full. So this provides opportunity also. That is what economic survey also says. It says that since in the last few years, global volume of global trade, especially India's trade has come down, it provides opportunity for us to increase the volume of global trade also, international trade, exports or imports. So this is what it is, you can say, ruled out. How to increase the growth? That is what we are looking at. The government expenditure, and whatever the economic growth that the country is experiencing right now, it is only because of increase in government expenditure. And there are limits to government expenditure. Why? Because government cannot keep on increasing its expenditure. It results in high fiscal deficits. When you have higher fiscal deficits, it will have adverse impact on the economic system. Why? Because higher fiscal deficits would result in what we call crowding out effect. There will be less amount of money available in the financial system to provide loans to private sector. It will also result in hardening of interest rates. India is already a high cost economy. If you have more fiscal deficit, it will result in more increase in rate of interest also, which will make your exports less competitive in the international market also. So the government does not have much of a freedom when it comes to government expenditure. And as I said that one of the problems with recession is that recession is the time when the government should be spending more, because to come out of recession you need government spending. Unfortunately, this is also the time when the revenues of the government are also falling. When the revenues are coming down, there is less amount of flexibility with the government to spend more monies also. If you look at this year's budget, if you look at this year's tax revenues also, there was almost a shortfall of almost 3 lakh crores of rupees of revenues. Obviously, it would result in that much amount of reduction in expenditure also. And if the government still has to spend money, how will the government spend money? Again, it has to spend money only through borrowings. If the borrowings are there, as I said, that it will have all its negative consequences. So government expenditure is also not one of the instruments to revive economy. It has its own limitations. Then comes investment and consumption. As I said, as you can see here, 7 plus 32, that is 89%. So the entire revival of Indian economy depends on how fast can we revive consumption and investment expenditure. Moving on the growth path, realizing 6%, 7% growth rates. This will depend only on how fast we can either improve our expenditure and investment. How fast can we do this? And the good thing here is that this consumption expenditure and investment expenditure, both of them are interrelated. They are interrelated. Why? Because any increase in consumption expenditure automatically results in increase in investment expenditure. Why? Because if there is an increase in consumption demand, then the producers will be investing more in the economic system also. Both of them are interrelated. And both of them are linked to one thing, that is incomes. Both of them are linked to incomes also. So if you can put it in a diagram format here, if you take this income, consumption, investment, which can again result in income. If there is increase in the income of the people, if the incomes of the people increase, they will spend more money on consumption. If they spend more money on consumption, there will be more investment by the industry. If there is more investment by the industry, it automatically results in increase in incomes of the people. This is what we call virtuous cycle. This is what also economic survey says as a virtuous cycle. So the question here is, to increase this consumption expenditure and investment expenditure, you must increase the incomes of the people. But how to increase the incomes of the people? How to increase the incomes of the people? So, to increase incomes of people, what you have to do? You have to provide employment to people. Right? You have to provide employment to people. When you provide employment, then only they will have incomes. And to provide employment to people, you have to invest in the economic system. To invest in the economic system, you have to increase consumption demand. To increase consumption demand, you need to increase in the incomes of the people. So we are coming back to the same thing here. We are moving in this circles only. We are moving in circles. So then what is the solution? That is what economic survey and budget tries to find out. And if you look at it, in any economy, you have two classes of people. You call them as producers. Second one is consumers. In any economic system, you classify them into these two classes, producers and consumers. Consumers are the ones who will increase this consumption demand. They are the ones who will increase this consumption demand. And if you look at India's perspective, we have huge amount of population. So obviously, the consumption demand should always be there. Consumption demand should always be there. But again, the problem here is that this population must also have capabilities. It must also have capabilities. What is the point of having only population without having capabilities to buy goods and services? That means they must also have what you call incomes. Right? They must also have incomes. Then only you can increase consumption demand. Again, if you look at it, take the decade between 2000 and 2010. If you go back to I will be going back to this decade of 2000 and 2010. Why? Because this is the decade we have witnessed these kind of healthy growth rates. What are the reasons why we have seen that kind of 9% growth rate? Why? Because in this decade, maximum amount of growth rate was because of consumption demand. Consumption demand. And where did this consumption demand had come up? It has come from what is called rural areas. It has come from rural areas. What is the reason why these rural areas had such huge amount of demand? Why? Because this was the period, this was the decade we have seen all around the world at the global level increase in commodity prices. This period witnessed commodity price inflation, especially food products, food and fuel, both of them, food and fuel. This was the period we have seen a very high amount of inflation in food products. Obviously, this high inflation in food products has benefited our agriculture sector. It has benefited our agriculture sector, because of which there was huge amount of rural demand. And that was one of the reasons why India could escape the negative consequences of a global recession also for some time. That was the reason why we could escape global recession also for some time, because of very high consumption demand, especially in rural areas, mostly from agriculture sector. Not only this decade also we implemented, especially from 2005 onwards, we implemented NREGA, which also added more income in the hands of people in rural areas. Then what happened? Then suddenly what happened? This global food prices had come down. The global food prices had come down. And fuel also has come down. This commodity prices had come down. We are talking about the later decade, 2010 to 2020. Especially from 2013 onwards, this global crude prices also had come down drastically. And food prices also had come down. And what did the government of India do during this period? Government of India, it has not increased the MSP. It has not increased the MSP, minimum support price, for food grains. Why? Because if MSP is increased, then it automatically results in food inflation. It will automatically result in food inflation. And this food inflation can be dangerous because governments are voted out of power only because of this inflation. The government was more sensitive to the needs of consumers than to the demands of producers. The government has artificially suppressed the prices of food grains during this period. So obviously what happened? What is the result? The result is that suddenly the rural sector started facing severe financial stress during the later part of the previous decade, rural sector, especially from 2014 onwards. Then the government realized its mistake. Then it started increasing MSP. But that was not sufficient. It was not sufficient. And added to that, what happened in India in the last few years, even though economic survey and budget never mention about them. Two important events took place: demonetization and implementation of GST. Indian economy is a largely cash-based economy, especially rural areas. What happened with demonetization? Demonetization had almost resulted in the collapse of rural economy. Even the government does not agree to this fact. It is a reality. Demonetization had resulted in a literally collapse of this rural economy, especially agrarian economy. Because this demonetization was done all of a sudden manner without having any alternative arrangements. The government started printing the currency after demonetizing the present currency. Then the government realized that we require currency also. Okay. So that is what. And of course the GST. With the implementation of GST, what happened? The small industries faced severe problems because it was implemented in a highly haphazard manner. These two events, we are discussing the reasons why Indian economy went into recession. Compared to the decade between 2000 and 2010, the later part of the previous decade, why we went into recession. So one hand we have said that this global food prices had come down, which had a major negative impact on India also. And secondly, the government did not increase the MSP. Third, demonetization as well as this GST. And these are the reasons why suddenly we have seen drastic decline in rural consumption demand, especially in rural areas. So from consumption, if you look at investment, the second major factor which can propel your GDP, investment. Again, if you look at between 2000 and 2010, what happened? This was the decade of expectations. That is what John Maynard Keynes talk about. Animal spirits. Animal spirits were flying very high. This was the decade economy was growing at 9% per annum. So what happened? During this decade, we have seen huge amount of increase in private investment. Huge amount of increase in this private investment, especially in infrastructure. And why this huge amount of increase in private investment, especially in infrastructure? Because of what is called anticipated demand. Because of this anticipated demand. All investment decisions, we must remember, are taken on the basis of future expectations. If you expect more demand for your goods and services in the future, as a company, as an industry, you would like to produce more also. You would like to invest more also. This was the decade when our industry started investing heavily in the system. And in this exuberance, what happened? Again, as economic survey points out, in this period, government, in the name of what is called pro-business policies, had opted for, crony capitalism. Had, pro-crony policies. It had resulted in a crony business, cronyism, crony capitalism. This was the period we have committed this blunder, crony capitalism. So what happened here during this period? What happened? What happened, what is this crony capitalism? How it had impacted? So what happened in this period is banks have given loans to this industrial sector without any proper checks and balances. That is the reason why the economic survey talks about trust. the loans were given without any proper checks and balances. Most of these loans were given to businessmen who were close to the establishment, government, who were very close to the government. There was no proper diligence on the part of the banks to see whether the people who are taking the loans have the capability to repay the loans or not. It resulted in crony capitalism. It resulted in systematic corruption. All those people who had taken the loans, what did they do? They had diverted the money. They had diverted all the loans for their luxurious consumption. They did not invest the money properly. So they had taken loans, that loans did not result in a productive investment. They did not result in productive investment. Obviously what happened? They have within a short period of time been transformed into non-performing assets. All these loans. This is what happening with the industrial sector. Within a short period of time, all of them had become NPAs. This is one aspect. Second one is, those who had taken loans, who have used the loans in a productive manner, that is, those who have invested in the system in a productive manner, they also faced problems. What is the problem faced by them? They created excess capacity. They created excess capacity. For example, 2008 global financial crisis. And then by 2010, India also started facing the impact. Growth rate was coming down. So whenever the growth rate comes down, automatically incomes will be less. When incomes are less, demand will be less. When demand is less, you will have excess capacities. This is excess capacity was created in its real estate. This excess capacity was there in power sector. We created excess capacity. Obviously, with this excess capacity, what happened? This industrial sector could not repay the loans. Normally, the idea behind taking loans is that you use that money to produce goods and services, create assets. You sell the assets and you will earn profits. That money will be used to repay the loans as well as rate of interest. But thanks to global recession and also subsequent slowing down of Indian economy, this excess capacity was created. That also resulted in this problem of NPAs. Please remember here, this industry as well as banking, both of them are interrelated. Your banking sector can be in a good shape only when your economy is doing well. And what happened in India? This industrial sector had almost collapsed for these two reasons. One is because of pro-crony policies of the government, wherein the loans were given without any collateral securities. Automatically, all of them would turn into NPAs. And second, due to excess capacities that they have created. Because they were anticipating huge amount of demand, but that demand never really materialized at the ground level, because of which they created excess capacities. And banking sector felt the pinch, especially our public sector banks, with a very high amount of NPAs, non-performing assets. Now, added to this, our financial system faced another crisis. The crisis in the banking system we can understand. Why? Because of the crisis in the industrial sector. Our financial sector also faced another crisis with non-banking financial companies also. NBFCs had become a major problem for India. This is another factor that also resulted in recession. NBFCs. So, in 1991, when we liberalized our economy, what did the government of India do? Especially in 1960s. In 1960s, the government of India had created what we call them as the DFIs, Development Financial Institutions. It had come out with development financial institutions like ICICI, IDBI, HDFC, IFCI, UTI. These were all development financial institutions. Industrial Credit and Investment Corporation of India, Industrial Development Bank of India, Housing Development Financial Corporation, Industrial Financial Corporation of India, Unit Trust of India. These were all what we call them as development financial institutions, whose basic objective is to provide long-term financial assistance to industrial sector. They would be providing long-term loans, 20 years, 30 years, long-term loans. Because infrastructure and industry require this kind of long-term loans. Banks normally would be providing short-term and medium-term loans. Banks would be providing short-term, medium-term loans. Whereas these development financial institutions would be providing long-term loans. What we have done is that on the basis of the recommendations of various committees, we have discontinued with all these institutions. Some of them were privatized. They have been converted into banks. ICICI had become a private sector bank. So is the case with IDBI, HDFC. All of them had become private sector banks. So there is a gap in the financial system. That gap is in terms of long-term finances. Who had filled in this gap? This gap was filled in by what we call these NBFCs, non-banking financial companies. These NBFCs started providing long-term financial assistance, like private sector ones, IL and FS, investment leasing and financial services. Then the DFC, Divan Finance Corporation. They were the ones which provided this long-term financial assistance. And what did they do? That is what economic survey also points out in one of the topics, one of the chapters. They took loans from the banks, and these loans were again further given to the industrial sector. So you have the commercial banks which provided loans to these NBFCs, which again provided loans to industry. And what is the basic problem here? Banks provided these loans, what you call them as short-term loans. Short and medium-term loans. Whereas NBFCs provided long-term loans. These NBFCs could issue what you call them as commercial papers. The questions will be asked in your prelims. This commercial paper, CP. Basically these commercial papers are nothing but short-term financial arrangements. Short-term financial arrangements. So, now what happened here? This one NBFC is giving a loan to industrial sector, infrastructure, long-term loan. So, in long-term loans, every month, you have to repay the premium or what you call monthly installments, EMIs. They have to pay it. And on the basis taking that money, they will be in turn paying to banks. That is the arrangement here. Now what happened here? Those who have taken these long-term loans, they could not repay their every monthly installments here. Then what happened? These NBFCs started defaulting on their payments to the commercial banks. And added to that, these industrialists have taken loans from the banks also. Right? Industrialists have taken the loans from banks also. Banks are putting pressure on industrialists to repay the loans because the NPAs of banks are growing. Non-performing assets. So what did they do? What these industrialists have done? These industrialists have taken more loans from NBFCs because banks will be giving you short-term, medium-term, whereas NBFCs are giving you long-term loans. So what the industrialists have done? They have taken loans from NBFCs and used that money to repay the loans of banks. Look at how complicated the system is. And suddenly the government has said that NPAs of banks are coming down. Economic survey and budget also says that thanks to the extraordinary efforts of our finance minister, who is working at least 80 hours per day, okay, NPAs have come down. Definitely they have come down also. And what happened here? The debt of NBFCs had gone up. So what these NBFCs have done? They have issued more commercial papers to take more loans. And another problem here is that this is what again economic survey talks about, governance issues, trust issue. These NBFCs had given loans to these industries without again proper verification. There are no stringent norms here. At least banks have some kind of stringent norms while giving loans. Whereas in case of NBFCs, there are no proper norms. Financial markets, SEBI has always been a big failure. So these NBFCs have given loans to industries who are not in a position to repay the loans also. Automatically what happened? For how long can you take loans? For short-term purposes, you cannot. After some point of time, NBFCs are also started defaulting on their payments. NBFCs. And it resulted in the collapse of these two important NBFCs, IL and FS, 1 lakh crores. 1 lakh crores, huge amount of money. So, similarly, Diwan Housing Development Corporation, Finance Development Corporation, both of them had collapsed. Almost around 1.6 lakh crores of rupees combined together. Both of them had collapsed. This NBFC crisis again impacted the entire financial system, putting the country more into recession. The country is getting more into recession. Because earlier it was only banks. Now, icing on the cake is NBFCs. Both of them started collapsing jointly. When you start sinking, you don't want to sink all alone. You will take other persons also because psychological comfort. Not only I am dying, but also others also are there. And of course, along with that, industry also. Industry also. So, This is where the problem is in the Indian economy. As I said, again added to that, to make the problems much more complicated, added to that, since BJP came to power in 2014, they have slowly but surely changed our foreign trade policy. We have moved more towards what is called protectionism. From globalization, we have moved more towards protectionism. In the last 5 years or so, the government kept on increasing the customs and excise duties on imports as well as exports. Kept on increasing these customs and excise duties. The government. Why? Because one, the government requires revenue. Second, the government had come under severe pressure from domestic industrialist lobbies. Our domestic industrialists, they could not compete with foreign sector. So they wanted protection. They wanted protection. So they kept on forcing the government to increase customs and excise duties. Added to that, as I said, at the global level also, other countries in the world also started using these customs and excise duties. Why? Because of the failure of WTO. To compound our problems, WTO was also a big failure. Had WTO been effective, it would have stopped the countries from imposing these kind of taxes that could hurt global trade. So this is what another thing happened. So what happens here when you are imposing more customs and excise duties? Your imports would get costlier. Not only that, it will have a negative impact on your exports also. Why? Because you have to use many imports to produce exports also. Our export industry also depends on these imports. Obviously, what happens? Your export would become less competitive in the international market, thanks to increase in these customs and excise duties. They would become less competitive. Economic survey and has again given lots of examples about all these things. It had resulted in our exports becoming less competitive in the international market, which has adversely impacted our global trade. Next, another significant event that had happened in the last 6 years is our inability to sign these multilateral agreements, treaties, multilateral treaties. As I said that with the failure of WTO, almost all the countries in the world have opted for these kind of regional trading agreements, RTAs. India was not effective in signing more regional trading agreements. On the other hand, recently we also have come out of RCEP. That is the reason why again Economic Survey devotes one full chapter about these trading agreements. Did India benefit out of them or not? It has proved with lot of statistics that definitely they would be beneficial for the country in the long term. But again, policies are always not rational. Most of the policies are emotional, sentimental. So the perception that is going around in the country is that when the country become part of these trading agreements, it is only the other countries which are benefiting out of it, not India. Why India has said that they would not become part of RCEP? Because it is said that China would benefit more out of these things. Chinese imports would be completely flooding Indian markets. India would not. That is where again India had adopted what you call cautious approach. This cautious approach also had impacted our trade significantly. It had impacted our exports as well as imports. Because of our inability to sign these agreements, we could not penetrate their markets also. This is another significant factor that resulted in the recession of our Indian economy. Next, another problem is that, another major issue is we have simply failed to provide enough employment opportunities for our people. This period witnessed continuously jobless growth. This period witnessed continuously jobless growth. Simply, we have not created enough jobs. Why? Because what are the programs that we have come out with, like Make in India? They have not been successful. That is what economic survey also accepts. They have not been successful. Programs like Make in India, Startup India, all these programs have not been successful. With jobless growth, what happens? With increasing unemployment, what happens? Automatically, the consumption demand will come down. As we have said, people will demand more goods and services only when they have income. They will have income only when they have employment. But the country witnessed jobless growth. And what happened is that not only jobless growth, it also resulted in increasing inequalities also. It also resulted in increasing inequalities. That means rich people have become richer. Poor people were becoming poorer. So what happens here is that when rich people become richer and poor people become poorer, as John Maynard Keynes says, marginal propensity to consume is very high among poor people. That means if your income increases by 100 rupees, if you are a poor person, you will be spending at least 95 rupees on consumption. If you are a poor person, you will be spending 95 rupees on consumption. If you are a rich person, if your income increases by 100 rupees, you will be spending maximum 1 rupee or 2 rupees on consumption. Why? Because as a rich person, all your needs are fulfilled. Maximum amount of demand of rich people is what we call investment demand, whereas poor people is consumption demand. So thanks to jobless growth, thanks to rising inequalities, what happened? The demand had come down. There is no investment demand. Rich people are not investing. Why? Because investment demand is a derived demand. That is, there is investment demand only when there is consumption demand. And there is no consumption demand. Why? Because there is no income. This added more to the recession. So this is what the situation of Indian economy at this point of time. When it comes to agriculture, as we have said, agriculture growth rate had declined. From 5% last year, this year it has expected it will be only 2.8%. Agriculture growth rate had declined. Industrial sector, again production has come down, demand also has come down. Then service sector, when you talk about banking sector is also facing huge amount of NPS, and NBFC is also facing serious issues. And then exports and imports are also going down. Added to that, as we have said, that we also have jobless growth. Under these circumstances, the government had to come out with some solutions. Let us see what are the solutions that are provided by economic survey and budget. What economic survey and budget had to say about all these things. So with all these things in background, keeping in mind, let us see what they have said. I said that the first part of economic survey, it basically gives ideas. It says that it will come out with out-of-box solutions, provided you have any box. Okay. So let us see what are those out-of-box solutions provided by economic survey. Every year in the last 5 years, economic survey is coming out with one solution or other. In 1 year, economic survey spoke about subsidies. The entire economic survey was about only subsidies. How these subsidies are hurting the Indian economy. In 1 year, it had spoken about this growth and developmental issues. In 1 year, it had spoken about financial system. This year, economic survey had taken about a new concept. It has talked about wealth creation. It had spoken about wealth creation. The first, as I said, the first part of economic survey is all about wealth creation. It had so many chapters. All of them will normally focused on this wealth creation. So let us see what economic survey had to say about wealth creation. And if you read this economic survey, there might be some doubt whether you will be gaining in-depth knowledge about economy or not. There can be a doubt. But what is sure is that you will have very good knowledge about Tamil literature. Whether you like it or not, this economic survey, like poison, putting that into your mouth. You will know about all those ancient Tamil literature, which I am sure Tamilians must have forgotten themselves. Okay. Economic survey is reviving traditional Indian languages. One of the important things. So it speaks about Tirukkural, Thiruvalvar, and then to ensure gender parity, it speaks about female writers also. And not to leave behind, it also goes into ancient Hindu literature also, ancient Indian civilization. Of course, budget also has taken that forward. Budget has talked about Saraswati Sindhu civilization, which we don't know whether it is there or not. But according to our finance minister, who had already deciphered Harappan, our finance minister, she should have been culture minister. Right? So, economic survey quotes extensively from all these ancient Tamil books, not to leave behind. Kalidasa, our finance minister, also spoke about that. And of course, you have the father of economics, Adam Smith, who spoke about wealth creation. So, economic survey quotes from Adam Smith to, of course, Kautilya, because after all, we are Indians. So, we should celebrate whatever the little intelligence we have. So, every chapter of economic survey starts with a quotation of Kautilya or Tirukkural or Thiruvalvar, all of them. And then added to that all other sundry writers also. So, leaving behind that unwanted knowledge of Tamil literature, maybe if you are planning to take Tamil literature in your mains, economic survey is the best document. So the problem is that economic survey is prepared by a Tamilian, Subramanyam, and added to that, to complicate the problem, finance minister is also from Tamil Nadu. Next year, what you can expect is that entire budget will be in only Tamil. Yes. So even if it is in English, nobody can understand. Don't worry. Okay. So coming back here, so what it says that This concept of wealth creation in India is as old as our civilization itself. We celebrated this wealth creation. Here, Kautilya's Ardhashastra talks about wealth. It says that the king should always create wealth. He should ensure prosperous economy. The king should always ensure that people have their basic material needs are fully satisfied through wealth creation. That is what he says. And then for hundreds of years, economic survey says that for 3/4 of known world history, India was the most powerful economy in the world. For almost 75% of 5,000 years of our civilization, India was the most powerful economy in the world, except that India was not a country. But don't take these things into small things. We should go by economic survey only. We were the most powerful economy during the times of Mughals. Akbar also, we had almost a 30% contribution to global economy. That means in India we always celebrated wealth. That is what it was trying to say. We always celebrated wealth. We never considered wealth as immoral. That is what the survey was trying to say. It was wealth creation was never considered immoral activity. We spoke about ethical wealth creation, creating wealth through ethical means. That is what the survey says. And this has changed after independence, especially between 1950s and 1990s, when we opted for socialism. During this period, when we opted for socialism, what the drastic change that had taken place was suddenly the word wealth had become a dirty word. The word profit had become unacceptable. And you can say that one of the important reasons was Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi glamorized poverty. Gandhi always lived in poverty. And he believed that anyone who is rich is always a bad person. Gandhi celebrated poverty. So obviously, we were too much influenced by Mahatma Gandhi. Anyone who is rich is always considered bad, a sinner. So under the influence of Gandhi and under the influence of Nehru, socialism can never tolerate profits. Socialism is nothing but distribution of poverty. Equal distribution of poverty. That is what is an egalitarian society. Egalitarian society means classless society. That means there should not be any classes, rich and poor. Everyone should be poor. That is what economic survey also was trying to put. It said that for 40 years after independence, we never focused on wealth creation. We only focused on distribution. Socialism gave more importance to wealth distribution. And it has said that this wealth distribution can take place only when there is wealth creation. You can remove poverty by increasing economic growth and development. You cannot remove poverty by distributing poverty. You can remove poverty by creating wealth. For almost 40 years, we have ignored this aspect of our growth and development. That is what economic survey says. Then it says that 1991, when we opted for a radical transformation in our economic policy. 1991, we opted for liberalization, privatization and globalization. From this point of time onwards, we started giving importance to wealth creation. From 1991 onwards, we started focusing on creating wealth. And it has said that you can see the results also immediately. It said that in those 25 years after that, we have removed maximum number of people from poverty. It had given lots of examples. For example, if you take the case of stock market, It had taken almost 20 years to move from, say, 100 points to 5,000 points. Our stock markets, 20 years. And then after that, this growth rate in the stock markets has been phenomenal, because the stock markets clearly indicate the prosperity of societies. And the best was achieved in the last 3 years. In the last 3 years, we have moved from 30,000 points to 40,000 points, showing a huge amount of creation of wealth. That is what the survey says. It says that we should celebrate wealth creation. We should not feel shy of creating wealth. We should not feel bad about wealth creators. And economic survey also quotes what the Prime Minister had said in his August 15th speech also, wherein he said that we should always respect wealth creators. Let us have some kind of self-esteem for these wealth creators also. We should not look at these wealth creators with suspicion. At the end of the day, these businessmen, these industrialists, with their innovations, with their commitment, are creating wealth, which is helping the country to overcome the problems of poverty. Then it talks about the importance of wealth creation. Why it is so important? It says that when we create wealth, it will increase in tax revenues of the government. Obviously, when the GDP is high, then only the tax revenues will go up also. This is what we say in economics, tax buoyancy. When your GDP increases, without increasing the tax rates, your tax revenues also will go up. When your wealth is created, automatically the revenues of the government will be high. When the revenues of the government are high, the government can spend more on social sector. The government can spend more on subsidies. The government can spend more on education. The government can spend more on health, which can help us in removing poverty. That is what survey says. It has helped the government to remove poverty. It is the private sector that creates wealth. It is the private sector that creates infrastructure. It is the private sector that provides employment. It is the private sector that increases GDP. It is the private sector that helps in improving the standard of life of people also. That is the reason why the survey says that we must celebrate this wealth creation. It has been part of our culture for 5,000 years. Only very recently, under the influence of socialism and partly you can say Gandhian ideology also, we felt ashamed about wealth creation for 40 years in the name of socialism. After 1991, we went back to our roots and we started creating wealth. This is what the first chapter of economic survey talks about. Moving on to the next topic, chapter of economic survey, how to create wealth. That is what survey says. This wealth can be created by the government which adopts what is called pro-business policies. This wealth creation can be done by the government by adopting pro-business policies. These pro-business policies of the government can help in creating wealth. The government must promote entrepreneurship. The government must promote innovators by adopting pro-business policies. And again, economic survey gives examples here. It says that between 2009 and 2014, or you can say go back to a little bit also, between 2004 and 2014, the governments had adopted not pro-business policies, they had adopted what is called cronyism. cronyism. That means they started favoring select businessmen. They started favoring select businessmen. Those who are close to the political executive got all the benefits of government policies. What we call it as a crony capitalism. It had given examples which all of us know also. Take the case of 2G spectrum. Spectrum allocation was done in an arbitrary manner to benefit select businessmen. Same is the case with the coal allocation. Allocation of coal mines. Same is the case with loans given by public sector banks. Same is the case with the loans given by public sector banks. So what we can say here is that in all these cases, in the name of capitalism, the government had opted for cronyism. And what was the outcome? The outcome, economic survey had said that resulted in collapse of Indian economy. It is one of the important reasons for present day recession. One of the important reasons for the present day recession that Indian economy is facing. Why? Because all those people who have taken the loans never repaid the loans, resulting in what we call twin balance sheet problem. A twin balance sheet problem. And one paragraph clearly specifically mentions what these people have done is that, for example, have taken say 10,000 crores of rupees loan. I wish someone gives me. Okay. So 10,000 crores of rupees of loan. What I will do? I will divert this money. I will use this money to give loans to my another company. I will set up 10 different companies. This money will be used to give UBS loans to other companies. I will not be using the money for the purpose for which it has been given. Vijay Malaya had taken the loans for King Finisher Airline. Okay. Of course, he finished also. And he had diverted the money and invested that money in IPL. That is what he had done. So, I would divert the loans, and this money I will be using to create my personal assets. I will buy houses in the name of this company, Binami companies. So obviously what happens? This will automatically turn out to be NPA. This is what exactly happened. That is how NPAs. The money, the loan was given for a purpose which was never used for that particular purpose. The money was diverted because they never had this intention of using the loan in a productive manner. And what is the consequence here? If you do like this, what is the consequence here? That is what economic survey has said. It had given the statistics. It said that 1.4 lakh crores of rupees have turned out to be these bad debts, NPAs. Banks, in 1 year itself, 1.4 lakh crores of rupees. Imagine 1.4 lakh crores of rupees. This is twice the amount of the money spent by the government on NREGA. More than twice the amount of money the government is spending on NREGA. It is more than twice the amount of money the government is spending on education and health also. Already the problems for a country like India is that resources are limited. And if you are not properly utilizing the resources, it can have much adverse impact also. So when the money was not productively spent, it had adverse impact on the economic system also. What is the adverse impact here? Of course, banks have huge amount of NPAs, because of which they were not able to give fresh loans also. They could not give fresh loans also. And secondly, since money was not spent productively, it did not create any assets also. There was no asset creation. There was no employment generation. There was no employment generation. And the opportunity cost also was very high. Had this 1.4 lakh crores of rupees had been used for NREGA, then what it would have done? It would have revived rural demand. It would have revived rural demand. The same amount of money had been used for NREGA. That nothing else had happened. On the other hand, as I said that since there is huge amount of NPAs, banks could not give any fresh loans also. Since there are no fresh loans, there is no fresh investment. When there is no investment, there is no GDP also. This cronyism had much adverse impact. That is what economic survey says. So that is the reason why what the survey says as part of this chapter is that we must move away from this pro-crony policies to pro-business policies. What is this pro-business policies? What is this pro-business policies? First of all, you must ensure entry of new firms into the market. You must allow entry of new firms into the market. It is all about the competition. That is what we say in perfect competition. Large number of buyers and large number of sellers. You must ensure entry of new firms into the market. And economic survey gives the example. Whenever these startups come into the market, they will always ensure better utilization of resources. They will always ensure better utilization of resources. New firms are always more productive than the old ones, which the last year's economic survey also had talked about. Last year's economic survey had spent a lot of time on giving the examples between old and new firms. New ones are always more productive and efficient than the old ones. Secondly, what you have to do? You have to ensure level playing field also for everyone. As part of these pro-business policies, what you must be doing? You must ensure level playing field also. What is this level playing field? For example, a new firm is competing with an established one. Established one will always have more advantage over the new one. Why? Why? Because established firm will have more political connections. They can use political connections better to get hold over resources. Established one also can get loans very easily than the new firms. So what you must do is that you must ensure level playing field so that the new firm will also have access to resources in the same manner as that of established ones. That is what survey says, pro-business policies. Next thing what you have to do is, as part of pro-business policies, you must ensure proper regulatory mechanisms. Proper regulatory mechanisms to prevent monopolies, to prevent cronies, and to prevent the market domination, and to protect interests of consumers. must have proper regulatory mechanism. For this, what economic survey calls it as this, Adam Smith talks about invisible hand. Adam Smith, who is the father of the discipline of economics, in 1776 he had written this magnum opus, an inquiry into the wealth of nations. He said that capitalism always functions on the basis of this invisible hand. All the actors involved in the economic system, become part of the system because of their self-interest. All these actors in the economic system are part of the economic system because of their self-interest, and this self-interest will transform itself into societal welfare through invisible hand. That is what he says. If I am a worker, I will be offering my services to the producer because of my self-interest. What is my self-interest? I will get my salary. That salary I will be using to survive myself and my family. When I am working in a factory, I am not working in a factory to increase country's industrial production. I am not working in a factory to ensure success of capitalism. I am not working in a factory because I like the owner of the factory. None of these things. I am working there because my self-interest. Similarly, when the head of the industry is giving me job, he is not giving me job because of anything else. He is giving me job because he requires my services to produce goods and services, which he can sell them in the market for a profit. That is what Adam Smith has said. Every actor involved in the economic system always functions on the basis of self-interest, and there is this invisible hand that transforms self-interest into societal welfare. That is how capitalism functions. That is what economic survey also says. Wealth creation takes place because of this invisible hand. But what the survey says is that this invisible hand must be supported by the visible hand. What is the visible hand here? Congress party. Right? Party symbol. Right? So what he says that it must be supported by visible hand here, government. How? By increasing the trust within the system. The government must be able to ensure that all the actors involved in the economic system have complete faith in the system. The government must take measures to improve the trust within the system. Then only invisible hand can work. Why this trust is very important? Why? Because, as I said, during this pro-crony days, especially between 2004 and 2010, this was the time when we witnessed crony capitalism. People have lost faith in the system. Why? Because of the crony capitalism. People have their lost faith because of banks were giving loans only to the businessmen who were close to the political executive. Spectrum allocation was done in a haphazard manner. Similarly, coal allocation was done in a highly arbitrary manner. There was complete failure of regulatory mechanisms. So if you want to revive your economy, if you want to again move on the path of growth, economic survey says that the government must improve the trust. That is what it says. Invisible hand must be supported by this visible hand in the form of trust. Businessmen must believe that if they do their business legally and ethically, they will prosper also. again economic survey had given the example. When the stock market was going up during this period, those firms, those industries which were close to the political executive, that the government of the day, their values of their shares were going up at a higher rate than other industries. Why? Because they were cornering all the resources. They were showing lot of profits. And what happened? After that, all of them had also collapsed. That ultimately resulted in the recession of Indian economy also. That is what economic survey says. This is what one of the topmost economists in the world, Joseph Schumpeter, he talks about. He talks about creative destruction. He talks about creative destruction. Schumpeter. Construction through destruction. Economic survey again gives the example here. He says that in this period, 1991, a listed firm in our stock market, had the lifetime of around 60 years. Very long life. And if you look at the recent listed firms in the stock market, it has come down to 12 years. Earlier, business houses were much more stable, much more secure, much more reliable, because there were no disruptions in the economic system. Everything was controlled by the government. Whereas now, thanks to globalization, what happens? The lifetime of any organization has come down drastically. Why? Because of constant innovations that are taking place. Here, a firm can be there at the top only for a period of around 12 years. It has come down from 60 years to 12 years. When we talk about trust, what we are saying here is that the government must be able to ensure this smooth transition, construction through destruction. Old firms will be going out of favor. They are replaced by new industries. Economic survey again gives example here. Here, in the initial times, stock market was controlled by what we call bricks and mortar economy. It was mostly iron industries, steel industries, either traditional textile industries. They were the top industries in the beginning of our liberalization period. Raymond's, Reliance, Tata's, they were mostly brick and mortar industries. Now, if you look at since the beginning of 2000s, three industries started dominating the stock markets. One is financial services, second one is IT sector, and third one is pharma industries, biotech and pharma industries. They are the ones which dominated our stock markets. Again, they will not be there on the top all the time because creative destruction. Old industries would be losing out their relevance, replaced by new ones. That is what happens as the economy progresses. Nowadays there is less amount of stability in the economic system. There is less amount of security in the economic system. This is where the government's role becomes extremely important. What the government must do is that government must ensure that there is continuity to the entire system by ensuring complete trust among all the players. It should allow for destruction so that this destruction can result in more construction. How this allows for destruction we will see as we proceed. That is the reason why the government had come out with this IBC, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. It should allow industries to destroy themselves also. You cannot continue forever. because new ones have to come. Creative destruction. This is what the government should be doing. Now at present, the life of a firm in stock market is around only 12 years. Go back to now, look at 12 years back, what were the top companies in the stock market? Now what are they? Sometime back, if you go back to 12 years, around 2007, 2008, what were the most, what you call profitable company in the stock market? It is not about Dhirubhai Ambani, it is Anil Ambani's Reliance Infra. The most profitable venture. Where is it now? Videocon. Where is it? G Entertainment. Where is it now? And where is our Kingfisher? That is what happened. Nowadays it is all about e-commerce. 12 years back, where is e-commerce? That is what we say, creative destruction. And the government should allow for this creative destruction. The government should ensure that these old forms are replaced with new ones, so that growth, which is always a dynamic concept, always remains dynamic also. So the next topic, as I said in economic survey, next chapter in economic survey talks about these pro-business policies. It says that we should move away from pro-crony policies to pro-business policies. How? Three things we have said here. One is, giving opportunities for new players to enter into the market. Second one is ensuring level playing field. And the third one is having a better regulation. This is what the government has to do. And again, economic survey also gives the example here regarding startups in India also. It has said that these startups in India have contributed significantly in the last few years to our economic growth also. In the last few years, they have increased from around 70,000 to 1,20,000 startups. And where do we find these startups in India? Most of these startups. In India, we find them mostly in the service sector. Service sector. It is in the IT, e-commerce. We find these startups in the service sector. Then we can find them in some of them in the manufacturing sector also. Very few of them, but they are still there. And survey also talks about these startups in agriculture also. It says that nowadays what we are witnessing is agriculture also, especially agro-processing industries. These startups, they are coming out. And as we have said, what is the role of the government here? The government must provide necessary conditions for these startups to flourish. That is the reason why the government had come out with so many policies also. That is where governance becomes very important. That is where we talk about governance also. That is what economic survey says. The role of the government here is that government must encourage. And when do these startups come? What are the conditions that are necessary? That also economic survey talks about. What are the necessary conditions? Here, economic survey says that these startups, we can see most of them are now city-based, urban areas only, urban areas. But slowly, they are moving from these metros to tier 2 and tier 3 towns also.
Startups are also there in like entertainment sector.
Everywhere. Entertainment is part of service sector, service industry. So, economic survey says that initially we find most of the startups in the metros, but slowly there is penetration here to tier 2 and tier 3 cities. But for this penetration to be successful, it says that some conditions should be fulfilled. The government should do something. What is it something the government should be doing? the government should ensure proper infrastructure. Proper infrastructure should be there. What it has seen is that it has conducted a survey in all the districts. What it was found is that in those districts which have better literacy levels, the startup ratio was also very high. When the literacy levels are very high, automatically entrepreneurial activity was also very high. So if the government improves literacy levels, automatically it can result in more startups also, because at the end of the day they are the ones who will be providing employment to the people. They will be providing employment to the people. Literacy levels, that is where we talk about social infrastructure. Next thing the survey says is that influence the startups is physical infrastructure. Where there is electricity, where there are better roads, where there are better drinking water facilities, and where there are better financial institutions to provide loans, that is also where you've seen more startups. Physical infrastructure as well as financial infrastructure. Both of them are catalysts for entrepreneurial activities. That is what survey says. This is what we call pro-business policies of the government compared to pro-crony policies. So this is what survey says. It says that the government should focus on encouraging the startups by creating physical as well as social infrastructure. Next, that is what we said, pro-business policies. Next chapter of economic survey talks about, till now what we have said is how and where the government should interfere. As we have said, the theme of entire economic survey is invisible hand of the markets should be supported with visible hand of the government. Till now what we have seen is that how the government should interfere positively. Now we have to see where there should not be any government intervention. We have to look at where government intervention actually resulted in recession. Government intervention actually resulted in economic growth moving in opposite direction. The government should also know where it should not interfere. Because what this socialism has done is that we have seen very big government, which does not automatically mean better governance also. There is so much of unwanted governmental interference, which has caused more harm to the functioning of economic system. That is what the survey has said. The next chapter of economic survey spoke about these things, wherein this governmental intervention has resulted in a market failure. Let us say what are those interventions by the government. Survey had given examples of Essential Commodities Act. One. Second one is it had given the example of Drug Control Act, where the government tried to artificially control the prices of medicines. It had given the example of interference by the government in functioning of the banks, public sector banks, where this interference only resulted in adverse consequences. And finally it had given the example of subsidies, FCA, wherein this unwanted interference by the government had come in the way of the functioning of market forces. It had come in the way of the functioning of what is called invisible hand. It had come in the way of the functioning of wealth creation. Take the case of Essential Commodities Act. Please remember, all these will be asked in your prelims only. All these legislations. Last year, if you look at in your prelims, almost 780 questions were only about various legislations. That is why I always say that economic survey is the most important document here for your prelims. So, Essential Commodities Act, it was passed in 1955. And basically, what is the objective of this act? To control the prices of essential commodities. Why? Because if you look at the history behind this Essential Commodities Act, this was the time when the country was facing a lot of scarcity in terms of food grain production. The country, everything was limited in supply, where it is food grains. You take it, everything, in electricity, education, health, everything was almost non-existent. And there were a huge amount of poor people in the country. The government felt that if everything is left to the market forces, then poor people will be adversely impacted. If the price of rice or wheat or other essential commodities go up, it results in more poverty. So that is the reason why the government had come out with ECA, Essential Commodities Act, wherein through this legislation, state governments are given the freedom to control the prices. And this also results in punishing the hoarding of commodities. These government officials would be regularly having surprise visits. They will catch all those traders who will hoard the commodities illegally. They will be punished. That is what Essential Commodities Act. The objective is to keep the prices of essential commodities under check. And economic survey points out that how this ECA had completely distorted our market mechanism. It says that a true capitalist economy cannot have any place for these interventions like ECA. It has given an example. Recently we have seen onion prices reaching almost 200 rupees also. What is the reason why onion prices have reached 200 rupees? Why? Little bit of agriculture, economics, geography, everything is combined here. If you look at onion trade, in India it is restricted to few states. Onions are produced only in few states. And it is also seasonal. What is the time period? Mostly from September to November. This is the season. Or you can say August to November. Then again late January to again May. This is the time when you produce onions. This is the time when you increase the supply. But the demand will be there all through the year. Unless your name is Nirmala Sitaraman. Who doesn't eat onions? Okay. Yes, whatever may be the reasons. So she is not part of the market for onions. So that is the reason why she is not at all concerned. But ordinary people, they are not like that. So what happened here? Every year the same thing. Now onions are declared as essential commodities. So under this Essential Commodities Act, you cannot hoard onions. You have to put them in the market all the time. If I am a trader, I cannot put onions in the warehouses, because immediately the government will come and confiscate. So what happens? By mid-November, the production will stop. And again it will start only late January. For 2 months, what happens? There is no supply, but there is huge demand. Automatically what happens? The prices will go up. go up. This is the situation almost every year. Added to that, this year, what happened? These unseasonal rains. This year, winter season has extended to first week of November also. Sorry, not winter, rainy season has extended to first week of November also in most of the states. Otherwise, by the end of September, the rainy season would be over. Thanks to these unseasonal rains, it has impacted onion production also. On the one hand, the supply is less. On the other hand, thanks to this Essential Commodities Act, you cannot hoard the onions also. Which resulted in zooming up of the prices. They went up to, as I said, 200 rupees also. Had there not been this Essential Commodities Act, what traders would have done? They would have hoarded this commodity. They have to put the excess output in godowns. Onions are not perishable. If you put them, they can be there for even 1 month also, no problem. And under specific conditions, they can be there for more time also. What they could have done, had there not been any Essential Commodities Act, they could have hoarded the onions, they could have put them in their godowns, and they could have released them in the market later so that the prices would be stabilized. But this was not the case. Why? Because this ECA. That is what economic survey says. It says that this Essential Commodities Act, instead of either stabilizing the prices, is responsible for high levels of inflation also. These kind of unwanted interventions by the government had only distorted the markets. These kind of interventions should not be there. Earlier we talked about positive intervention by the government. These negative interventions are only coming in the way of the functioning of the market mechanism. Second, it gives the example of drug prices. The government is controlling the prices of essential drugs. And what happens here? When the government artificially controls the prices of drugs, what happens? Industry, when will they produce the goods? Only when they have profits. When will the profits go up? Only when the prices are high. Then only you will have profits. When the government artificially controls the prices, what happens? Will there be any investment by the industry? Obviously not. There will not be any investment by the industry. Survey gives the example. It gives the example of the medicines that are used for blood sugar. It gives the example of diabetes. It gives the example of diabetic medicines. 2 editions. It gives the example of 2 medicines. The price of one is not controlled by the government, and the other one is part of Drug Control Act. What happened? The second price gone up by 70%. The price of the drug which is controlled by the government, it has gone up by 70%. Where the price of the drug which is not controlled by the government has gone up by only around 10%. Why? Because whenever the government artificially tries to either suppress demand or supply, it will always have a negative impact on the markets. So what happened? Since the price of this drug is controlled by the government, nobody is producing them. How does the government determine the prices here? It says that what is the cost of production and plus around 10% or 12% profit. That is how the government determines the prices here. There is huge amount of demand, but there is no supply. Why there is no supply? The government controls the prices artificially. Industry is not willing to invest in those drugs wherein the government is artificially controlling the prices. And added to that, 70% of the drugs are purchased by the government. Monopoly. This is not called monopoly. In economics, we call it as monopsony. Monopsony means single buyer. Here, what is happening? Most of these drugs are brought by the government. So it is the buyer's market here for drugs. Obviously, it results in a artificial increase in the prices of drugs also. Economic survey says that is the reason why these kind of unwanted interventions by the government can only result in distortion of production processes. These unwanted interventions can only result in production process distortion. Third example the economic survey gives is about banks, public sector banks. And what happened with the public sector banks here? All these public sector banks during this period which we spoke about now, between 2004 and 2014, they were forced to give loans by the government to cronies, which resulted in huge amount of NPS. That is the reason why if you look at the total NPS in the banking system, 80% of the NPS are only of public sector banks. Only 20% of the NPS are private sector banks. Why? Because here, what is the reason why only public sector banks have huge amount of NPS? Because the government did not allow these public sector banks to function independently. That is what again economic survey says. It says that wherever there is unwanted governmental interference, it had only come in the way of effective functioning of markets. And this is one of the important reasons why the country is facing severe recession also. Why? Because what is the reason why only public sector banks have huge amount of NPS? Simply because there is no professional functioning of public sector banks. There is no way public sector banks can decide who should be given loans and why should they be given loans. Because as our Prime Minister used to say, we had during this UPA period phone banking system, wherein a finance secretary would call up the chairman of a public sector bank and say that Mr. X is coming to your bank, give him 5,000 crores loan. Phone banking system. Long before we had Jandan, Aadhaar and mobile. Okay. This phone banking system was far more effective. That is why again public sector banks were incurring losses. Next example they give is continuing with this only. Economic survey has given is this another intervention in the form of loan waivers. 2009 elections, general elections, the UPA government had come out with this loan waiver scheme. 70,000 crores of rupees of loans were written off. 2009. And then what happened subsequently? This was also adopted by state governments. Political populism. In states like Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Maharashtra, in recent times, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, all the states have opted for loan waivers. And what is the consequence here? First of all, the scheme benefited only 26% of farmers and only benefited rich and rich farmers only, mostly. Second thing is that this writing of loans, it had sent wrong signals to farmers. What about those farmers who have repaid the loans? That means you are punishing honesty and rewarding if not dishonesty, inefficiency. Obviously you are not sending right kind of signals. And what happened? Farmers stopped repaying the loans later. Why? Because they know that if they put pressure on the government, especially the state governments, they will write off the loans. You are taking a loan from a bank. When you start repaying the loan, what happens? Bank will become bankrupt. That is what exactly happened with the financial system. Banks could not recover from this loan melas that were conducted by the central government first and later by the state governments. Almost every state had opted for this loan waivers, writing of the loans. So obviously it had a huge negative impact on the banking system. It had a huge amount of NPAs of the banks. And banks could not give any fresh loans also. They could not give any fresh loans. This is one side of the story. The other side of the story is that where did the governments get money to write off these loans? State governments. What is the source of state governments? From where did they get money to write off these loans? They have diverted the money that otherwise would have been spent on capital expenditure. So, if you look at it, in the last 10 years, capital expenditure of the state governments had come down drastically. Capital expenditure of the state governments had come down drastically. When there is no capital expenditure, there cannot be any growth also. That is one of the important reasons again why the country is facing recession. Capital expenditure of the state governments had come down drastically. Why? Because state governments are diverting all their resources only to finance these loan waivers. Very recently also, the Maharashtra state government again had come out with the second installment of loan waivers. That is where again the problem. These kind of interventions will distort the production processes. It will distort the functioning of market mechanism. This is another example given by Economic Survey. Next example it had given is about subsidies, food subsidies. So again, last year also the question was asked in your prelims. Food Corporation of India, it buys food grains from the farmers at prices fixed by the government, what we call them as minimum support prices and later procurement prices. So FCI is buying say around 25 rupees wheat, around say 36 rupees rice, and it is giving to people living below poverty line at 3 rupees or 2 rupees, like this, right? So this is where huge amount of subsidy will be there. And what we have done, we have passed this Food Security Act. Food Security Act. As part of Food Security Act, we have opted for universalization of these food subsidies. Universalization of food subsidies. Under this, 75% of people in rural areas and 50% of people in urban areas should be receiving these food subsidies. Added to that, we have implemented other programs also. Under Food Security Act, we also have a midday meal scheme. For that also you are providing subsidy. Similarly, we have Annapurna scheme for families living below poverty line. In fact, as part of FCA, we have extended this scheme to everyone also. A family living below poverty line will be given how many kgs of rice or wheat? 35 kilos of rice or wheat. And what we have done is that we have extended the scheme also. Obviously, it had resulted in huge amount of food subsidy bill of the government. Bill of the government. So when you are spending almost 2.5 lakh crores of rupees only on providing food subsidy, where is the money with the government to invest in infrastructure? That is what economic survey asks. Where is the money with the government to invest in infrastructure? Because even now also revenue expenditure is very, very high. You can have growth and development only when the government spends money on capital expenditure. With so much of a food subsidy bill, where is the money with the government to be invested in capital expenditure? And that is the reason why if you look at in the last 10 years or so, capital expenditure as a proportion of GDP has remained either stagnant or it has come down. And that is the reason why there is no improvement in infrastructure also. When there is no infrastructure, there cannot be any economic growth and development. That is what economic survey has said. Two things are important here. One is government should know when and where it should interfere. Second, government should most importantly know where it should not interfere. In all these interventions, it only resulted in market diversions, market distortions. Whether it is Essential Commodities Act, whether it is drug prices, whether it is management of public sector banks, whether it is the loan melas conducted by the state governments, or whether it is Food Security Act. And this year, we'll discuss about the budget also. In this budget, the government has said that they have reduced the food subsidy bill to 1,10,000 crores, something like that. How did they reduce it? By asking Food Corporation of India to borrow more. 1,30,000 crores of rupees would be borrowed by FCI. Combine both of them, it will be 2,40,000 crores. But the government has to show to the world that they have controlled fiscal deficit. That is the reason why they are saying that let FCI borrow all these things. At the end of the day, either where it is through left hand or right hand, you are breaking your teeth only. Right? So that is what is happening. That is what economic survey says. Next chapter of economic survey talks about the most important issue of Indian economy, job creation. How to create jobs, how to create employment. Yes, how to create employment. Employment creation. This is one of the major problems. As we have said, the country is witnessing a jobless growth. So what did the government do to create employment? The government had come out with this flagship schemes called Make in India. It has also come out with the schemes called Skill India, Startup India, Stand Up India, Go to Hell India. Okay. So many schemes it had come out with. The last one was successful. Okay. Yes. So economic survey has said that all these schemes are successfully failed. So let us use the word success also, otherwise you feel bad. Here, what economic survey has said is that none of these schemes have been successful. Whether it's Make in India, Startup India, or Skill India, or Stand Up India, none of them are successful. Various reasons. For Make in India to be successful, you need conditions also to be present in our country. Because conditions are not present. At the global level, countries have opted for protectionist policies. So exports have become difficult. Failure of WTO. We could not also become part of trading associations. And then the input costs in India also are very high, especially after the implementation of land acquisition acts. Getting the land also had become very costlier. And of course, major problem is unskilled labor. So that is the reason why Economic Survey has said that Make in India has not been successful in providing employment jobs. So what is the solution? It has said that the solution lies in transforming this Make in India into Assemble in India. Don't make in India, but get all the inputs from all over the world, assemble that in India. That is what it has said. What do you mean by that? Again, Economic Survey gives the example here. It gives the example of China in the early part of the present millennium. Between 2002 and 2007, I think 6 or 7, China had opted for this assemble in China. What do you mean by that? These multinational companies are there. Economic Survey calls it as networking products. These multinational companies, Apple, what do? They will either bring all their inputs to China and they are assembled in China. Why? Because the maximum amount of cost of production is labor. China had a cheap labor. And China had allowed these kind of imports also. And it had allowed, so Apple would import all the technology, all the raw material, all the inputs. And in the Chinese factories, they come out with the final product using the Chinese labor, cheap labor. And Economic Survey has said that with this concept of assemble in China, in these 5 years or so, China has been able to create 70 million jobs. That is what the survey says. It said that 70 million jobs were created with this innovative program. It had invited all the multinational companies to come and assemble their products in India, in China. It has said that on imports, we will not have any taxes. It had drastically reduced the taxes on imports so that it will not cost much for these companies to bring their raw material and technology from other countries. And China had huge amount of cheap labor. And this cheap labor was used to produce them. China would not benefit. For example, either per one Apple phone, what is the amount of money China would be getting? Maximum around $6 or $7 profits they are getting by assembling them. Profits are very less, but what it is doing? It is providing huge amount of employment. That is what Economic Survey also has said. It has said that let us shift from Make in India to Assemble in India, so that we can also create huge number of jobs. So what Economic Survey says is that if we adopt this Assemble in India, at present our contribution to global trade is 1.6%, 1.7%. We can increase it to 3.5% by 2025 and to more than 6% by 2030. If we adopt this strategy of Assemble in India. And what are the industries where India can have what you call comparative advantage? The entire global trade functions on this principle of comparative advantage. That means where the cost of production in your country is less compared to other countries, you will be producing those goods. So Economic Survey says that India can make use of its cheap labor. What the survey is saying is that this assemble in China in recent times had stopped because the cost of labor in China had increased. All these multinational companies no longer find China to be a favorable destination because of increase in cost of labor. Compared to that, in India, cost of labor in India is still very less. We can use this advantage of cheap labor to make this assemble in India successful. What are the areas in especially automobile industry? This is where we can have assemble in India successful. Similarly, electronics industry. This is also especially in this electric cars. You can get all the raw material and technology from foreign countries, use cheap labor in India, because you have so many engineers in India who are willing to work as class 4 employees also. Right? For a change, give them productive employment also. Right? Through assemble in India. That is what it says. Similarly, this mobiles also. Here, these are the areas where India can make this assemble in India successful. Added to that, Make in India also can continue. This Make in India can continue in traditional Indian industries like textile industries, garment industries, where Make in India can also be successful. Because these are all labor intensive industries. In these labor intensive industries, if the government can focus on these labor intensive industries for Make in India as well as for this assemble in India, we can somehow overcome the problem of unemployment. As I said, that economic survey has said that we can create at least 60 million jobs in the next 5 years through this assemble in India. But again, for this, what the government should do? The government must cut down customs and excise duties. Government must cut down tariffs. The government must allow private investment. The government must also do not put any kind of restrictions on those industries. For example, if foreign investment has to come to India, we will put the condition that they must use at least 25% of the resources that are available in India as part of Make in India. Who will come and invest? Apple wanted to start their industry in India, but government had put the condition that you have to utilize your own 25% of machinery you have to procure only from our country. Apple has said that bye bye. Okay. That is what. Foreign investors will not come on your terms because beggars can never be choosers. We are unqualified beggars. Yes. Right. So that is where similarly when you come out of this RCEP, you are only going more into production. In the last 6 years, as we have said, the government is moving in the wrong direction, opposite direction. Instead of reducing the tariffs, customs and excise duties, it is increasing those things. It is putting a lot of conditionalities. As part of Make in India, it is saying that you have to produce everything in the country, employ our own people. What will you get? Nothing. That is the reason why survey says that let us have assemble in India. Let us shift from Make in India. For that you have to create proper business environment. That is what the next chapter of economic survey says. Yes.
Made in China.
Yes.
So what the difference with assembly is there?
That is what either what the difference here is that if you are saying that Make in India, you are procuring the raw material from India, you are employing Indian people, you are technology also, everything should be Indian, and Indians only will be buying.
What I'm saying is they are assembling in China, but it's written like made in China.
Obviously, they can write it. They cannot write that assemble in China. They cannot write assemble in China, parliament in China like that. No. It is made in. Obviously, it was made in China only. It was made in China only. The label will be made in China only. But raw material will be imported. Everything technology, because you are combining all the inputs. When you combine all the inputs, that is what is called make-in. So that is fine. As I said, that is what China has done. It has come out with an economic policy, trade policy, which facilitated this kind of technology transfer. And that is the reason why China had achieved huge amount of success also. So that is where the next question comes up, that is ease of doing business. That is what the next chapter of economic survey talks about. Ease of doing business. That is what it says. So again, this is where the survey says that thanks to the policies of the government in recent times, India has improved its ranking in ease of doing business index from around 140 to 63. 63, I think, the latest one. India has improved its ranking. Why did we improve this ranking? Because we have implemented some of these radical reforms like IBC, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. We have implemented GST. And we have also relaxed norms related to FDI. Government has given 100% FDI for most of the foreign investment also. And we also have, improved what is called the ease of doing business. But in spite of doing all these things, the survey says that still there are so many problems when it comes to doing business in India. What are the problems here when it comes to doing business in India? For example, registration. Registration of your firm or industrial organization. It can be land registration, house registration, or firm registration. Survey gives the example here. In New Zealand, the entire thing can be completed in a half day. You go there in the morning at 10 o'clock, by 1 o'clock, you are ready with your papers. In India, okay, that is where it takes at least 40-45 days minimum if you are lucky, extremely. Otherwise, you will be moving in circles only, with no end and beginning. That is where the problem is. Still, economic survey says that this is the most biggest problem foreigners face in India. Everything, registration of your firm to house to everything else, property. That is where maximum problem is. Next, what are the other problems that we face in India? Contracts. India is still considered a very difficult country to do business with, especially fulfilling the contractual obligations. For example, you are in India, you are importer, right? And you have given an order to exporter sitting in America. The order is worth around, say, $1 million. So you have given advance at 20%. $2 lakh you have already paid. And on the basis of that advance, he had sent to you the entire consignment. After receiving the consignment, you disappear. फिर भी दिल है हिंदुस्तानी. Okay. Basically, we are bad. Under normal circumstances, we are bad. When the situation is bad, we are worst. That is where the problem is. Contractual obligations. And then this person comes to India to file case against you. You know what happens then? What happens? Nothing. He will come back, he will stay in India for 2 years, 3 years, 30 years, 40 years. He will die here also. A new program, die in India. And that is where the problem is. The problem is here contractual obligations, contractual obligations. India is always considered a difficult country to enforce the contracts. That is the reason why last year economic survey also had spent a lot of time on legal reforms, contractual obligations. Next problem when it comes to is paying taxes. Paying taxes itself is a complicated thing, and the whole process of paying taxes is much more complicated. After implementation of GST, what you are doing, all through the year you are only paying taxes. Either you are paying taxes or you are spending your time in paying taxes. Again, economic survey gives the example. How many hours are spent by businessmen in India in paying taxes? Make it a comparison to, say, a businessman in America. Thanks to GST, you have to pay monthly returns, 12, then quarterly, 4, half yearly, 2, then annual, 1. Added to that, they keep on sending you so many, the notifications also, the department. And they will never give you input tax credit on time. Paying taxes is a taxing affair. That is what economic survey again points out. This is the reason why it becomes difficult to do business in India. Ease of doing business. Next, another, this is where the problem is. And the economic survey gives also beautiful examples of why in India doing business is very difficult. For example, it gives an example. You are an exporter, and your industry is there in, say, Haryana, and it has to be sent, your consignment has to be sent to ports, say in Gujarat. From there it will go to America. So this entire process will take place around, say, 50 days. Survey says that almost 90% of it will be only spent only in India. Why? Because the consignment which is sent from godown in Haryana, by the time it reaches Gujarat, thanks to the condition of our roads, the trucks can travel maximum 20-30 kilometers per day, provided they are going at top speed, lightning speed. Okay. So by the time it gives the example, it takes almost 18 days to reach Gujarat. After reaching there, you have to wait there near the port for unloading of the trucks, because the port at any point of time is running with excess capacity. You have to wait there for 6 days for unloading, another 6 days for loading, and another 6 days for getting the permission. By the time it is over, you will jump into the yes, and it gives the example of America. It gives the example of America. When it reaches American port there, any city there, everything will be over in 24 hours. Unloading will take place in 2-3 hours. Getting permissions in 2-3 hours. From there, it will go to their godown in exactly 10 hours. In America, in 10 hours, their trucks will travel around 780 kilometers. Because the roads are very good. Okay. That is where it says, with this kind of procedures, can you expect your business to grow? Ease of doing business. The same thing, whether it is exporters or importers. When you are traveling so much, when you are spending for a lot of time, it is not only about time, it is also about money. These trucks will be spending huge amount of money on consumption of fuel also. And fuel rates in India are also very, very high. That is what economic survey says. And near the ports, there is too much of unwanted bureaucracy. You have to sign hundreds of documents. And you have to bribe so many people also. So where is the question of ease of doing business? That is what it says. If at all you want, you must implement governance reforms. That is what the next topic of economic survey talks about. I think we can stop it here for now, and after lunch you can come back. We will do the rest of the things. We'll do the rest of the topics in economic survey. At what time do you want to come back? In half an hour, 45 minutes? 45 minutes? After that, we'll have more food for thought. At present, you can have food. Rest of the topics and budget also we will see after that. And by the time we finish, I will also give you the important material. As I said that the synopsis of economic survey, both part 1 and part 2, budget as well as important articles from newspapers. So you can come by 2:45, right? You can come by 2:45.